Hotep family, my name is Brother Ray Ray. Today is February 26th. I'd like to welcome everybody to the African Helping Africans lecture series in honor of Dr. William Mackey Jr., Luis Reyes Rivera, Gil Noble, Dr. Professor Amos Wilson, and all the historians that gave up fame and fortune, chicken dinners, big cars, big houses, insurance for their kids, because they chose the route to tell the truth in this vicious system. We honor these people, people like Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Van Serti, Professor George Simmons, all the people that gave up a lot of stuff because they chose to try to bring some history to African people. We bring this in honor of these people. We are meeting amongst ourselves and part of organization to bring information to the black community. We have to do something. The European studies 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and 7 days a week.
That's right.
To keep their stuff rolling.
That's right.
And if we don't have nothing to come on with that, we are done. I also want to thank Dr. Arthur Lewis, Brother Truss, who used to come here and sit in Mackey's basement when nobody else came and Mackey used to talk. We used to have potluck dinners for Amos Wilson up on 155th Street, where everybody would bring food, and Amos would sit there and talk to us. These people left us too early, so we meet amongst ourselves to help ourselves, because it seemed like ain't nobody gonna help us. I want you to bring the camera over to the Amos collection. All books that we sell in Mackey's are the Amos collection. Blueprint for Black Power. The psychology of hatred and self-defeat toward a reclamation of the African mind. Brother Sababa just finished this book, almost 5 years in the making. I have a few copies. I have copies of everything. The developmental psychology of the black child. Awakening the natural genius of black children. The falsification of African consciousness. African-centered consciousness versus the New World Order. And the topic that everybody don't want to talk about is black-on black violence. Once you read that book, you will not be asking any questions on why we kill each other. Because that's the first thing they say. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. Y'all killing each other. Once you read the Amos collection, Sababa busts his can for these books. So any book you buy, the money goes directly back to Sababa, where I could buy more books. That's why we sell it, we call it the Amos collection. Now, this is the last of Black History Month, and from now on, Black History Month will be 365 days a year.
It's supposed to be that.
Tuesday, 5 o'clock, on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Brother Mike Graves, 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement. The program is Community Cop. You tune in at 5 o'clock. They go from 5 o'clock to 5:30, and then call in. It's the hottest show in New York. It is fierce. Saturday, while everybody is moving,
I don't do that anymore.
swinging and slinging, and dancing, we have Blog Talk Radio with Sister Empress Chief. Come on at 10:30. When you turn it on, you scroll down. As soon as 10:30 hits, you hit the button and the date will come up. If it's last week's date, you hit the date and it come up for Saturday. They go from 10:30, sometime all the way, to 1 o'clock in the morning. It's on Saturdays. Excellent program. Also, Brother Truss has a Friday lecture in Newark, New Jersey. Fierce. If you think you know anything about studying, you don't know jack. Until you listen to the way this brother.
That's right.
You think, I thought I knew something, that's why I'm just a driver. I carry the bags and the big books. The lecture's gonna go all the way around to about 5 to 9 or 9 o'clock. Then we have refreshments. We have soup, juice, refreshments for y'all. That's going to go from 9 to about 10 after 9. After 10 after 9, we're going to bring Brother Truss back. We're going to bring it around to maybe 10 or 10 minutes after 10 for question and answer. One question at a time. Let him answer the question, please. Then it will be another question. We're going to keep this real simple because for someone it's supposed to be a hot topic. Truss gave us a homework assignment to watch Netflix. He chose the topic, the assassination of Malcolm X, also known as El-Haj Malik El-Shaddad. So we are going to bring him in to do his lecture on the assassination of Malcolm X. Without further ado, I want you to give a big hand out of Newark, New Jersey, in African Echoes. He did a fierce lecture on from George Washington to Donald Trump, which president was the best for black folk. No. And it seemed like it was none of them. You just missed it this Sunday out in Newark. And we all came out there and had a good time. He will let you know when he will be having his next lecture. But without further ado, I want y'all to give him a great big hand.
Come on, Truss. Well, I feel really, really good today. Really good. One is because it's Black History Month. It's African History Month. You know, it's time where we can focus on ourselves. Second, I'm real happy is because Keisha here. You know, I'm real happy when I know Keisha here. Because that's our warrior. Y'all know that, right?
Yeah.
That's our woman warrior.
That's right.
Not that shit y'all be seeing on TV with blue and white and red and front. No, this is the real warrior.
Right on.
Real, straight up. If I ever was in a battle, in any kind of way, that's who I want holding my back. So let's give Keisha a hand. In every particular capacity, and one of the things we don't do enough is highlight, underscore, and applaud the accomplishments of our sisters. You know, it's a problem. We got a big problem in our neighborhood when it comes down to those kind of things. You know, when we talk about the struggle, you know, they become an honorable mention, a footnote, a sidebar. You know, no, that's not how it is. They are our complement. They are our direct opposite on this side. That means that they reflect us and they are part of us. They're not in back of us, they're not in front of us, they're on the side of us.
That's our history.
You know, and that's how we should see it. But I want to thank, you know, African Helping Africans again for giving me this opportunity to be with y'all this week. Again, we had a nice presentation last week or 2 weeks ago, and I thought that it would only be apropos that we end this out with dealing with something of significant value that's in the news today and been circulating for the past couple of weeks, and that's that new documentary on Malcolm X. And you know, I viewed it twice, and I asked those of you that did anybody have the opportunity to view it? Okay. Right. Well, and what I would say is that if you didn't, make yourself available to us. 6-part series. It's put out by Netflix. Well, I should say it's debuted by Netflix. The executive producer of the program is Louis Henry Gates. I'm gonna smack you. Louis Henry Gates, and he's the executive producer. As you know, what's her name, Harris? I can't remember the sister's name. I should be shot right now. But she also was one of the associate producers of the project. And as you know, the narrator, the major personality that they're using for the particular project is a brother by the name of Abdur Rahman Muhammad. And most of the personalities that were in the video were individuals that I'm familiar with or friends of mine. You know, whether it be Zach Kondo or, you know, Zaid Muhammad or, you know, a lot of the individuals that they have viewed from Mosque 25 in Newark, you know. And one reason is because my family, you know, was in the Nation of Islam, you know, for quite a number of years, and my mother and my youngest brother also were very steep. It was a part of the family, you know, cultural experience, and you know, during that particular time, there were a variety of things that were going on inside the mosque, and I'm talking about in Mosque 25 in Newark. And before I get into any details about that, I want to give you a little background in regard to the Nation of Islam itself, so that way we get a little understanding on, you know, who the nation is and how we are looking at them. I also want to say this before I go, and that is that, you know, I have a real great love for the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I have a great love for what the nation as a whole did to the black community. But I also know that as a student of history, it's about truth. And it's not about favoritism, it's about truth. Now, that's sometimes we have a problem when we study history as Africans, that sometimes we get clouded in our judgment based on romanticism of personalities in regard to truth. And the issue is that for us to really learn the lessons, it takes truth to do that. Real truth. So what that means is that we leave every no stone unturned in trying to seek out what we are going to investigate and going to uncover in order to, again, seek that particular goal of truth. And the second thing is that I want everybody to understand, when I say truth, I'm not talking about something, you know, edged in stone. I'm not talking about something fixed. When I talk about a history of the Nation of Islam, I talk about a history of the Nation of Islam, not the history of the Nation of Islam. Because as, you know, an individual who had some particular experience with, I know one thing, there is no the history of anything. No, for real, there is no the history. That's right. Even of yourself. That's right. No, that's for real. You know how I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove it, how important that is to you. And show you how even knowing yourself ain't even all your job. Now, if I ask somebody how old they was, could somebody tell me how old they was? Somebody? Anybody? Go ahead, Keisha.
49.
She's 49 years old. I don't believe you're 49. As a matter of fact, not only I don't believe, I know you're not 49. And what we have in regard to what we know is based on our conscious awareness of our experience in regard to our existence. I mean, like how we got here, where did we come from, who made us, you know. But existence, your personal existence is based on consciousness. That means your awareness of who you are, you know. Now, she said she was 49, but I know one thing is that from the time she was born until a particular period of time in her life, her awareness is very, 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 very limited. All of us know that. And majority of what we know about that time period is something somebody told us, not what we actually experience and really know. And the things that we do know, like I said, are very, very marginal. They're very limited. And we can reflect on them, but we don't have no clarity in regard to what that is, you know. So out of human behavior, you ask Dr. Amos or Bobby Wright or Francis Crest, they'll tell you that that consciousness don't start showing up until, you know, you become about 6, 7, or 8. That means actually knowing you exist in this world and what that actually means. That means you don't have to understand it, but actually know and be aware of it. So what that means is that that awareness, when you become conscious, that means is that you become aware of who you are, but also you begin to understand and have some intimate relationship with your surroundings. So the first thing I just did was I just cut off about 6 years, Keisha. So what that means is that if we keep going, I can make you 32. No, but that's just to give you an idea in regard to what we perceive of something, but what we actually know of something, you see. And what we know of our experience, a lot of it is very limited only because it's ongoing. It's going so rapidly that sometimes we fail to realize that as we evolve and grow, some of those things that we did experience is fading away, you know? So again, these are the things that we, you know, want to begin to address. So, when we talk about the Nation of Islam, we have to take into consideration that this is an organization that was developed specifically at a period of time where there was a major event taking place in the African American experience. And that particular event was called migration, the Great Migration. And this was the end of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century. And we were going through a process of what we call a transformation economy. Transforming from an agrarian economy, meaning an agricultural economy based on crops and planting and all of that, to an industrial economy. See, when you talk about slavery, that's called a plantation or a planter economy. And when they talk about plantations, see, we talk about a lot about plantations, but Dr. Lewis will tell you, real plantations were very, very few. But they controlled a lot of land. You know, the average slave, the average household that owned slaves was less than 5. See, when we think of plantations, we think of this huge place with all of these hands, and that's not really how it took place. But you had individuals who were so huge in the industry, they literally changed the whole demographics of what it meant to be slaves. You know. So Mike could tell you that in my presentation this past week, I was giving them the numbers in regard to presidents that owned slaves, and then also the significance of those slaves in the region or the area in which they lived. So I'm going to just run this off real quick, and y'all will get an idea. George Washington owned 317 slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned 600 slaves. James Madison owned 100 slaves. James Monroe owned 75 slaves. Andrew Jackson owned 200 slaves. Martin Van Buren, 1. William Harrison owned 11. John Tyler owned 70. James K. Polk owned 25. Zachary Taylor owned 150. Andrew Johnson, 8. Ulysses S. Grant, some say 1, some say 5, depending on what sources are out there. Out of the 12 individuals that owned slaves, 8 of them owned slaves while they were in office. So like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, the two first, one 317 and the other 600, they wasn't slaveholders. They were major slaveholders. In the whole county, in the whole area, and as Mike indicated earlier, that George Washington was one of the major slaveholders of the country. So when you think of him, and you got to take into consideration the time period in which he actually owned slaves. And this is the same thing going for somebody like Franklin. Y'all familiar with Ben? Ben was a Quaker. Anybody know anything about Quakers and slavery? What is that, Mike?
They were abolitionists. They were against slavery, for the most part.
For the most part, that's correct, but not actually at a particular time. Anything before the American Revolution, they owned slaves, including Ben Franklin. If you ever want to find that out, there's a book called American Statesman, Slavery and the Negro by Nathaniel Whale. That's W-E-Y-L. W. Whale. And in that book, it'll give you all of the information about Benjamin Franklin being a slaveholder, but also Benjamin Franklin was way worse than Donald Trump when it comes down to immigrants. Benjamin Franklin was so deep in regard to his, exclusion of immigrants. His position was, even white individuals who are not white are not, we don't want them here. So he didn't believe that Germans was white, Russians was white, Italians. No, for real. This is Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
His position was to be white, you had to be Anglo-Saxon and Protestant. That was his yardstick, his definition. So when you think about it, Donald Trump ain't doing nothing but something that he already been doing a long time. Don't get caught up into that, your hungry masses and that nonsense you see on the Statue of Liberty. That wasn't for you anyway.
No.
But anyway, during that time, in the beginning of the development of the Nation of Islam, it happened during that migration period. And we're going to speed through this pretty quick. The migration period represented a major period of a turning point where that agrarian society was transforming into an industrial society. And what that meant was that those Africans who were in the South that were literally, being exposed to all varieties of mob violence as well as, conditions that was beyond deplorable, the issue was to seek new ground. And a lot of this had a lot to do with the issue of slavery. And that was based on, as we know, it was broken down. See, we look at slavery based on North and South. But that's not really how it was.
Right.
And all of us know that it had a lot to do with individuals who was in positions of power to dictate policy, because there was as many slaves in North as it was in South. Don't y'all know that one of the major trading areas in this country for slave trading was Rhode Island? Rhode Island. And Rhode Island became this like citadel for not just slavery, but for Jewish slaveholders in that area. If you ever get a chance, there's a book out. It's called
Lopez Newport?
Yeah, Lopez Newport, Aaron Lopez. Aaron Lopez. See, only Harold read that kind of stuff. That's my man. But during that particular time, that migration was very important because Elijah Muhammad's family and all of them came from that particular area. And the name that he has, the Poole family, they were part of the white Pools that originally were in that area. And the area that we're talking about was actually Georgia, the area of Georgia. But most people think that Elijah Muhammad is actually born in Sandersville, but he's not. He's actually born in a place called Cordelia. And the reason that is because it's like us. If you're born somewhere in some hick place, you're going to get the biggest town that's next to you and say, I'm from over there, So when I'm in Africa, I don't say I'm from Newark, I'm saying I'm from New York. Right. Everybody know New York. Yeah. So if they say you from New York, I say, oh yeah, that's the guy from New York. I'll be like, yeah. But again, this is what was taking place. So Elijah and his family decided that it was in their best interest to escape those particular conditions and move north. and they moved north in the late 1800s to early 19th. And what that meant was that he was seeking some refuge in regard to the conditions. So a lot of it was job oriented and family oriented and so forth and so on. And remember, Elijah comes from this very strong Christian background. I mean, like real strong. Not just little bit. His father was one of them serious preachers. His grandfather, serious preacher. And Elijah comes up with this intention that in his life he's going to be a preacher. And his father was so deep about this was that when he would go to church every Sunday, he would take Elijah, put him up on the podium while he's teaching the sermon, and he'd be blazing. And Elijah said that at sometimes it would scare him. He was so scared, you know. He said, and then after a while he got used to going back and forth, and he began to realize that some of the stuff his father was saying wasn't all true. Because he read the Bible. So him and his brother would test his father after they would give the sermon on Sunday, on Monday morning, they would go to his father and say, you said so and so and so and so. And then his father William would have to go to his mother and say, you don't get these boys out of here. No, that was the deal. And this caused a lot of backlash. But one of the things it did for Elijah was he was bent on trying to live within an accurate paradigm of how he viewed the Bible. He was almost like this Martin Luther of Islam. He was like, look, either you're going to go by what it say, or that stuff you doing, So when Martin Luther overturned the Catholicism, it was because he felt they wasn't living according to the rules and regulations. And Elijah felt the same thing for his father. But they moved from this place called Cardelia, they moved to this place called Hamtramck. Hamtramck is a place in Detroit. And it's like a little road town on the outside of the larger city. And he moves his family there, and at that time, when he moves, I think he got 3 kids and 1 on the way, something like that. And when he gets there, his big problem is that Elijah was one of them kind of guys who couldn't take orders and, couldn't take rules. He wasn't that kind of guy. If you asked him to do something, he would do it to the best of his ability. But his position was if you was riding him, he wasn't going to do that. He was going to fight. He was going to rebel. So he wasn't able to keep jobs a lot. And a lot of times his only way to supplement that was he drank. And he got drunk. I mean, like pissy drunk. He got drunk so bad one time, they found him laying in the streetcar, drunk. That's right. And they had, on the track, they had to run, go call his wife, so-and-so, and they run and pick him up, this, that, and the other. And he was really bent out of shape about the whole thing. But one day, how all of this starts is one day, his father comes home and says, look, I met this guy. I was down in Detroit, I met this guy. And they was talking this kind of talk. He said, man, it was really something different. It wasn't like, now this is his father's a preacher. And his father's telling him about this guy. And, Elijah is listening. But, he takes it in and keeps on going. Then all of a sudden, his brother come back and tell him something. Then his wife come back and tell him something. He's like, wait a minute, what the hell going on? And he said, well, maybe I need to go and check it out. So he decides he wants to go and find out what they talking about. And what they are actually talking about is they come across this guy who, again, at that time, nobody's really familiar with who he is, but they know that he talking some different talk. Because remember, when we're thinking about the Nation of Islam, we're thinking about, at this time, in the early 30s, that we are thinking about not actually Muslims, but Christians. These are Christians. These are Christians that have been removed from the South. They have a very Christian, strong value system behind them. And the other thing is that the majority of those individuals are elders. They're older people. So the culture and the atmosphere that's in the nation at that time is reflective of that experience. You get what I'm saying? It's not that clean cut, you know, very disciplined, militarized. None of that exists yet. And as I always say, remember, this relationship that begins to start with Master Farad Muhammad is specifically the foundation in regard to the teachings of the Nation of Islam. Now, how many people are in here familiar with the Nation of Islam? Raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand. How many people have ever been familiar with the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. All of y'all are liars.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead, brother.
Now, the reason I say that, and it's not a facetious, and I'm not doing it, and you know, to be mean-spirited. It's doing it to show and understand that if you don't do your homework, you will end up with the wrong answer. And in this case, those are the teachings of Master Farad Muhammad. Elijah never had any teachings, and he will tell you that. He will say that these I learned for 3.5 years from Farad in the person of Allah. By him, the questions and the lessons are given by Farad, and they are answered by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Right.
But they only answered by the information that Farad gives him. So again, let's not get it twisted. Elijah, and believe me, like I said, one of the greatest men that ever produced an organization in the Western Hemisphere. This is one of the best. But he had no teachings. And that's not a bad thing. Because as I tell Mike and everybody about the Nation of Islam, the teachings, the core literature of the Nation of Islam, or the mindset of the Nation of Islam, was Farad. The personality, the character, the very nature of that outward appearance that we are so familiar with, that's Elijah. The guy who actually created, that means molded, shaped, formed, literally, that's Malcolm. See, don't get it twisted. A lot of times we get the wrong message because we're not really clear on how these things unfolded. And like I said before, my major concern is always about truth. So when you see a picture like this, 1932, one thing that's significant, as you can see, Farad is here. It says Prophet W.D. Farad. It didn't say Allah. It didn't say in the person of God. It said prophet. Because at that time he wasn't no God. Didn't exist. Why? Because that concept didn't develop until he left.
That's right.
And when he left, the organization split in two. And you had two groups. One who believed he was a prophet, and one who decided he was God. So which one do you think Elijah was with? One thing significant about this picture, and I'm going to pass it around. Take a look at it and tell me if you see something in that picture that's familiar with something else. Or another group. Say that again?
Masons.
He said the Masons. Give that to Dr. Lewis. And if you think you recognize it, say it. If not, just take a look and pass it on. Because there's something very important about the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam did not develop in a vacuum. It developed based on the very nature of other organizations that already pre-existed before it. So a lot of the characteristics, a lot of the personality that eventually becomes the foundation of what the Nation of Islam is, a lot of it was drawn from other organizations that already existed. It ain't by chance that the FOI looked like the African Legions in Marcus Garvey's organization. All the way down to the dress. It ain't by chance that the White Cross nurses in Marcus Garvey organization looks exactly like the MGT in the Nation of Islam.
Right, brother, teach.
And really, I shouldn't be saying Nation of Islam because it didn't exist at that time. It was called, the name of the organization was called Allah's Temple People. It didn't become incorporated until many years later in Chicago. Remember, what we talking about is Detroit. Most people, when they talk about the Nation of Islam, they think of Chicago. So again, this is setting the foundation in regard to that. So that's why I wanted to get you on the mindset and make sure that credit is given and credit is due to the individual who was the underpinning to this, and that's Master Fard Muhammad. Now, I want to talk a little bit about him just to give you an idea. What do we know of Master Fard Muhammad? Very little. Anybody know that we just had Sages Day? Y'all do know that. Just recently, Sages Day just took place. This is some of the material that they had at Sages Day. But this is from my neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. That's my mayor. You know, we got a black mayor. We got a black mayor. and
30 years ago, son.
Said, yeah, but your black mayor wasn't a revolutionary. See, my black man, he the son of one of the baddest revolutionaries in all of America. Bad, one bad. He was so bad that white folks made him poet laureate of Newark. And when he wrote a poem that talked about the World Trade Center, they said, "Negro, you out." Real fast.
We have Broadway.
Yeah, the white way. We got Broad Street, the black way. Listen, this is what our mayor said. This is what our mayor, listen to this. This is our mayor, Ras Baraka. It was more than a meeting, because they have these breakfast meetings. They call all black male men's breakfast meetings. You know, where they get all their brothers together and we sit down and we talk about all of the issues or whatever we need to do to address community. But this, I'm going to just read a paragraph or two. It says, it was more than a meeting. It was an event. It was a phenomenon. It was amazing. We speak of Newark, New Jersey Mayor Ras Baraka's men's breakfast program. It was a high-energy, extremely successful gathering of Monday, February 17, 2020, of maybe over 2,000 mostly black and brown men and some women that packed the Newark Robert Tree Hotel's Grand Ballroom. It said the people came to see and hear the mayor, and he did not disappoint. In a fiery educational speech he delivered in the framework of do for self, knowledge of self, he taught that the black man is God. This the mayor of Newark. He said the black man is God. He support black businesses, get out the drug game, sell goods and services to the city, and buy and develop property in Newark. One of the thing he's been doing for the last 4 years is making sure any available property in Newark go to us. He got a lottery program put out.
Yes, sir.
So our organizations go up, they say, look, now you might have to fix it up, put a little sweat equity, so forth, but we're going to give you something to work with. Them white boys there, they ain't doing that, but y'all know in New York, that's what they do to their white friends. Y'all know it. Ask Bloomberg, he know. He gonna be y'all next president. Yeah, that's where you watch. But anyway, this is giving you an idea. And one of the things, this picture that you see, that's a picture of Master Fard Muhammad. And one of the things in this particular issue is they talk about, you know, Yaqub and the Ebonite woman, and the piece that I'm trying to see is they talk about the where is it? They talk about the brain. They talk about Farrar and Ed Montgomery, and and that he was not that person who they say he was. Now, why would that be in this kind of paper in celebration of Savior's Day, and you trying to defend the authenticity of your Savior? That don't sound right. What's the logic of that? You see what I'm saying? Or else you feel you're still under attack in regard to what that means and what it represents. And the reason I'm saying that is because in those early days, after that split took place, Elijah Muhammad was under the group where he wanted to adhere to Master Farrar Muhammad as God, and the other group didn't. See, a lot of people also get the idea when they talk about Elijah that he was the individual who founded the organization. No, he wasn't even around. As a matter of fact, the organization was in full-fledged operation when he got there. When he got there, matter of fact, according to the story, you had about anywhere between 5,000 to 8,000 members. Was they completely 100% memberships enrolled in the organization? I wouldn't say so. But there was enough individuals in support of it that it began to alarm the local authorities. So what that did is that Farrar, in order for him to move in those areas, one thing, he had to be real slick guy. Because it wasn't like he was one of them guys who was like close to being black. I mean, he was more close to being white. When I was growing up, you know, they had to make some justification because the problem was, how can we justify this white joker running all these black people? See, the nation, even in the document that you see here, they say that he spoke 16 languages and wrote 10. This is what Elijah said. Elijah said he come from Saudi Arabia. Elijah say his mother was Baby D and his father was Alfonso. Father was black, mother was white. And they said that when they got together first to try to make him, they come up with a girl. Then they try again, then they come up with a boy. This is the story now. Now I just want to say this, I just want to be clear. Nobody was there when it happened. It's like Jesus. No, it's real. Nobody was there. See, we get these creation stories, and a lot of times we look at them as actual events. Yeah. They're not. Yeah. They're explanations of unexplainables. That's what the very nature of a creation story. You're trying to explain something that you wasn't there. So you're coming up with something that you assume will be logical for the time. And at this particular point, you're going to find something different. So when we talk about these stories, and I'm not just talking about, you know, Bible and Quran, I'm also talking about organizations and all of that. You got people thinking that W.E.B. Du Bois started the NAACP. He did.
One of the founders, though, right?
Say that again?
Wasn't he one of the founders?
No, sir.
No?
The founders of the NAACP was Mary White Ovington, Villard, English, and Walling. Those were the four white individuals. The idea came from English because he happened to be in Springfield, Illinois when the event happened. Yes, ma'am. Excuse me.
This picture reminds me of the Moors.
See, I like this lady here. Give her a hand. Because what she's saying is 100% correct. Because it's given the impression as if though those particular individuals were, in this case, members of the Moorish Science Temple.
The way they're sitting.
That not only just they're sitting, but because they're wearing fences all over the place.
Right, but they,
in regard to clasping of the hands. But again, a lot of this, they, acquire because, remember, when we talk about the Moorish Science Temple, remember, that's 1913. And that's Newark. You get it? That's Newark. when we thinking about the very nature of the incorporation, when Elijah and them hook up, remember when the Moorish Science Temple end up getting to Detroit and Chicago, that's quite a few years later. They don't become incorporated until 1929. You know, what's his name? Green and all of those guys is dead. And the newspaper in them is just coming out. So what that means is that the Moorish Science Temple is first of those three organizations. After the Moorish Science Temple, you get the UNIA. The UNIA, 1916. Because we all know about his relationship and his quest to seek to seek Booker T.
That's right.
And Booker is what? Dead.
That's right.
But the difference is that because there was such a tumultuous situation that jumped off with inside the Moorish Science Temple in regard to Claude Green getting killed and all of this kind of stuff jumping off, that it literally stunted that growth. With at the UNIA, leaps and bounds, it just took off. Why? Why did the Moorish Science Temple not take off and the UNIA did? It's because one thing Garvey began to realize, that if you really wanted to find out what was going on, if you really wanted to make an impact or a change, you couldn't do it in Alabama. So where did he go?
New York.
He came to New York. It's so nice, they named it twice. New York, New York. So he came to New York and he knew one thing. The first guy he come into New York and he meet that really was the premier mover and shaker. And then how did he meet him? He see him on the street corner speaking. As I told you the last time I was here, he's the greatest intellectual of the Harlem Renaissance, bar none.
Okay, you would have it.
That's right. It's not what I say. Go ask W.E.B. about it.
That's right.
Ask any of the intellectuals of that day, and they'll tell you he the guy where we got our marching orders from.
Socrates.
Bernie Sanders running around talking about socialism. He don't know nothing about socialism until he met Henry Harrison. The first socialist colored league that existed was right in Harlem. And all of this was taking place during that particular Renaissance period. So all of this is laying the backdrop for when Elijah and all of them began to set up shop in these northern, concentrated areas of these major cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Kansas City, LA. These was like these hubs where Africans that were coming from the South, remember when we think of the migration, most of the time we just think north. That's not how it happened. It was north, west, and the Caribbean. Y'all do know that a lot of us went back. That's right. So what that meant was that they had to find some way to justify, because remember, when the Louisiana Purchase got burnt, the problem was, we didn't realize that when Napoleon lost the Louisiana Purchase, that wasn't just Louisiana. That was half of all of the country, all of the state west.
That's right.
Mississippi.
Listen, it was so much land, listen. So what did the Americans do? They said, well, now we got access to the land. What we got to do? He said, we got to kill all of the jokers on it. So what did they do? Anytime white folks want to kill you, they come up with a law. Yeah.
I thought you said alcohol.
Well, that too, that's part of it. They take a drink and make the law. But they came up with a thing called the Indian Removal Act.
Yeah.
Think about that. The Indian Removal Act.
Yeah.
That means we make legislation to kill you.
Make it legal.
Right.
Jackson,
Well, they also had one one for Africans. It was called the African Exclusionary Act. This for all of y'all that worked on the Panama Canal and couldn't even live in Panama. You worked on it, built this big edifice, and now you say, oh, well, I want to put my family here and, you know, make this happen. They was like, oh, now here it ain't going to happen. It's crazy. But again, this sets the foundation. And the nation literally becomes a part of that particular experience. How they become noticed to the general community was through these meetings that they were having in Detroit. But how they became noticed to the local authority was an event that took place, was a sacrificial killing by a brother by the name of Robert Harris, alias Robert Kareem. We killed this individual as a sacrifice in recognition to what they believed was a 1400-year prophecy. And what he did was he commandeered this, he went and he was out preaching with individuals, and he wanted to get somebody that would submit to being the sacrifice. Now, I mean, like, you really got to have some game. You go convince a joker, look, I'm going to kill you, so, you know. But what he did was he got them to believe that the sacrifice was really in their best interest. But the guy, he's telling the guy that he's going to come back to life and all of this kind of stuff and so forth. And the guy went for it. So Robert Harris takes him to his house, sit him down in the chair and everything, because he said at 12 o'clock they're going to do this, right? So it's like, you know, about maybe 10 minutes to and everything, and Robert Harris go in the back, and he come out, and my man is having reservations now. He's like, wait a minute, I might not want to be doing this right now. Robert Harris is like, oh, hell no, we're going to do this. So he go in his closet, bit out an axe and bust him upside the head. Then he kill him, haul him up on the mantelpiece, and do his thing. After a couple of days, the stench from the body, they call the police and they find out what had happened. When they investigate, they find all of this information pertaining to not just the Nation of Islam, but Moorish Science Temple material, this, that, and the other. So they go do a research, and the first thing they do is they go after Farad. That's his first contact with the local authorities. And it's because of a murder charge. In a Detroit Free Press, at that particular time, 1932, there's a picture of Master Farad Muhammad in the middle. He's holding a book. You got two detectives on both sides of him. And he's giving them an outline in regard to what he believed, what they believe his teachings were. The other thing, unless y'all know something I don't know, you getting, you know, arrested for a murder charge, we ain't just asking you your name. You understand? In other words, we want some documentation. We want to know who you are in every way you could imagine. Now, what that means is that once the local authority begin to acquire this information, and I'm talking about this record information, it becomes legitimate. You know, it ain't like you can go and run and change your fingerprints. You understand? And these are some of the things. That was his first. He got his second contact with the local authorities was involving this issue about not taking your children to school. And they had to go to court. And when I was in court, some commotion jumped off and somebody got shot. According to the story, it was the bailiff's gun that did all the shot, that did the shot, but it was a commotion by the followers of the Nation of Islam that actually caused the event. And a lot of, you know, jokers was sent to jail. So, I mean, this set the foundation in regard to the local authorities. Because remember, ain't no FBI looking at them, none of that, you know. Because remember, at that time, there is no FBI.
That's right.
You actually, it's just, the FBI is just a marginal part of the State Department.
Yeah, OSS.
Yeah, well, yeah, but the issue is that they take J. Edgar Hoover and they actually create an agency for him in regard to the particular endeavors that they decide they want him to address.
Right, it was the Bureau at that time.
It was the Bureau, that's all they called it. And the other thing is that during that particular time, Hoover's major claim to fame, his first major case that put him on the map, Marcus Garvey. Now, mind you, that whole case was based on $5. Y'all do know that, right? No, for real. It was based on $5.
Mail fraud.
Mail fraud. In other words, you took a product that you did not have, that was not legitimate. You sent it through the mail for a business transaction. Now, these white boys, remember, their position is that they busted Al Capone on what? Right. Because they couldn't get him on alcohol. They couldn't get him on gambling. They couldn't get him on killing. I mean, anything that you would assume that they, you got this amount of evidence, they didn't get him. They get him on what? Tax evasion. And what he died from? Syphilis.
Yes. Yeah. Probably in jail.
In jail?
No, he didn't die in jail.
No, he got out of jail. His last was on the island, on the Alcatraz.
No, he lived in. He went back to Florida. He was.
No, but I'm saying is that his last bid was on the Alcatraz,
Right.
and then when he got out of Alcatraz, then he went to Florida.
Right.
Right. And matter of fact, that's where you see that big monument they got of him is in Florida, ain't it? They got a big monument, gravesite thing for Al Capone. How I remember this is when they did that thing with Geraldo Rivera, remember that? Rocks in the cave. But anyway, this again created the foundation for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and eventually the inception of the Nation of Islam. And when Farad and him go into that, and Farad leaves, Elijah takes the mantelpiece of that particular sector of the organization, and they fight back and forth. And eventually, Elijah maintains, they split off, and the organization is a handful of individuals. Maybe, 10, 20 individuals. This is in Detroit now. And what happens is they get into a fight. And a brother by the name of Theodore Rosary is the individual, Haitian individual, who they end up going back and forth with. And Elijah is under such threat that he decides that he can't handle it. And he cuts out. He leaves Detroit and goes to Chicago. And then when he goes to Chicago, he gets into another beef. But this beef is with his own brother, Kalat, and he gets into a beef with his main brother, Augustus Muhammad. And then they leave Chicago. He can leave Chicago and he go to Milwaukee. And that's where he come up with a brother by the name of Sultan Muhammad. Sultan was actually the first national spokesman for the Nation of Islam. Just before Malcolm. And during this time, one of the things that I had found out before a lot of my material got destroyed, I had a audio of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. It was like 1950 something. Which is an audio, and it's Elijah Muhammad speaking in Washington D.C. and I swear, if you didn't know it was him, you'd have thought it was Malcolm. That's how fiery he was. This is before the onslaught of bronchitis and all of these various ailments that he had, these respiratory ailments that he had, that eventually, overtake him. And I think a lot of it was because of the weather he eventually began to endure in Chicago and Detroit got to be a little bit much. So that's why, if you did not notice, Elijah spent most of those days, in his later days, in Arizona or Mexico. That's where Tanetta and all them, Mexico, Ibrahim and all of them, that's where they was born at. That's where they're from. And one of the things that's also significant of that is that the time in which these things are taking place. Now, one of the things also too is that, remember, when Elijah takes over the organization, it's a very short period of time in regard to the period in which he himself begins to get control of the organization. So after he leaves Detroit and goes to Chicago, he leaves Chicago and goes to Milwaukee, he leaves Milwaukee and he goes to Washington, D.C. Now, the reason he goes to Washington, D.C. is for two major reasons. One, because Master Farad Muhammad told him about 104 books that he really has to read, and the only way he can find them is in the Library of Congress. So that's one of his major concerns. But he also, you know, has some individuals that he runs into while he's in Washington, D.C., this couple who owns a rooming house. So he goes and he gets a room and he makes friends with them, and they become his first converts. And after the locals in Detroit and in Chicago find out, you know, what's going on, they decide that now the information is start being transmitted to other particular locales. In other words, you know, Detroit is now talking to Chicago, and Chicago is now talking to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee is now talking to Washington, D.C. And eventually, they pick his ass up. He's picked up in Washington, D.C. in 1943.
Who picks him up?
Who picks him up? The police pick him up. FBI. And what do? They pick him up on 2 counts of violation of selective service and 8 counts of sedition. Tried to overthrow the country.
You might explain what is selective service.
Selective service is you didn't go to the damn war. But the problem was, he was too old. At the time in which the charge was brought out, he was already too old. But their position was, we're going to pin this joker with anything because we want him, kind of issue. So when they went to court, it was a big commotion back and forth, and Elijah had his oldest sons, Emmanuel, Nathaniel, and what's his name. And what they did was they in the courtroom, and all of these other individuals are there, and they going back and forth. So the judge, Emmanuel, is arguing with the judge, and he tells the judge, I don't care, I hope the Japs win the damn war. So you know what the judge said? No problem. Everybody else get 3, you and your dad get 5. So that's how they ended up in the federal pen in Michigan. Because when they found Elijah, he was rolled up in a rug underneath a bed.
That's right.
Right. He laughing because he know the story. Right. The thing was that was the first time that the local and the national authorities actually got a copy of lessons. You know, the catechism that Farad had put out. But one of the things that they said, and even in the FBI files, they were saying is that they couldn't make heads or tails out of it. Half the stuff they couldn't read, the grammar was all messed up. It was just completely, you know, unorthodox all the way around. So what they did was they charged them with whatever, and their position was, long as they out of Washington, D.C., they back in Detroit, we don't care what happens. But one thing that did happen was while he was in penitentiary, that's where the infrastructure of the organization began to grow. They opened up a grocery, they opened up a bakery, and they opened up a cleaners.
Trust, who financed all that?
Well, the issue is in the beginning it was you had a variety of different finances that were coming. Most of it was local, the regular Joes.
Well, let me change the question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. What role did his wife play?
Oh, well, come on, she was a bad lady, man. When it come down to finances, she used to sell, metal on the street. She would do every kind of thing. Remember, when he was locked up, she was the one that was running the organization.
Right.
Remember, there would be no Nation of Islam if it wasn't for Clara Muhammad. She ran that joker, and brother, she kept them together. It was small because, remember, it became fragmented because of the infighting. But eventually, once they got control, she ran everything, and she went around collecting, doing everything she could to raise money. See, a lot of times when we think about those early days, it was really self-development. I mean, like really. Later on down the road, there's some other factors involved, you know. And I'm not talking about internal, I'm talking about external, whether it's Gaddafi or the Hunt brothers or a whole bunch of jokers, you know. Y'all familiar with the Hunt brothers, anybody?
Right.
The Hunt brothers, the corner the supermarket.
That's right.
These boys,
Brought it down.
yeah, these boys was crazy as a bedbug. Yeah. But their position was they was like Bloomberg. We put our money anywhere as long as we know we're gonna get a return.
Yeah.
You know. But in this case, at that early stage, Clara created that whole glue that kept everything together. And when Elijah got out in 46, you know, that was the real beginning of the Nation of Islam. Not in 1932 or 1931. And yes, that was the what we would call the contactual beginning. But the actual formal beginning comes when he comes out, and that's when they begin to refine the very concept, character, and everything within inside the nation. And remember, this is also when he gets out, Malcolm is going in. Because Malcolm goes in what, 42 or, no, 47?
46.
46, right. He goes in 46 and he gets out in 52.
Right.
And remember, as I told you, at that time, most of the Nation of Islam is all Christians. But see, remember when Malcolm comes in and he decides that he's going to develop the nation. Remember, prior to Malcolm, you might have a handful of mosques. You know, maybe 5, maybe 4, you know, at the most. And then when he comes in, I think he gets Philly, Boston, and somewhere else. Philly, Boston, and somewhere else. He gets 3 in the beginning. Elijah is so elated over this. He's like, we gonna let this guy do his thing. So his position was, it was almost like they let him loose on the whole country. And Malcolm, you know, took it. As soon as his feet hit the ground, he was running. And he literally changed the organization by leaps and bounds. And everybody knew what that really meant. That means that he was this like savior for Elijah. Why? Because Elijah, over them first 10, 15 years, his position was he had enough of that, the police looking for him, and you know, he don't want to deal with all that no more. So his position is that he's going to take a backseat position. He's going to still run the organization and going to be the, you know, the figurehead. But the guy who's going to be doing all of the talking, we're going to let this guy go out because he's more, you know, capable. He's more articulate, this, that, and that. And that's not to say that Elijah wasn't, because most of us, when we think about Elijah, the first thing we say, oh man, he couldn't even talk. I'm telling you, he wasn't that kind of guy. I'm telling you, he had skills. He was good. I mean, really good. And this is what created the whole mystique of the nation. And also, at that time, and I'm telling you that Farad wasn't God and he was a prophet, the first time that I'm familiar with that whole story comes from a brother by the name of Hatim Shahab. He was a Palestinian brother who did his dissertation at the University of Chicago in 1959, 57. And in that dissertation, it was on the Nation of Islam. He did a 14.5-hour interview with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And in that dissertation, he tells the reader of how he created the messenger, how he created the title The Messenger, and how he created Farad as being God. In that article, in that dissertation. Now, if you want to go check it out, University of Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's called the University of Microfilms Incorporated. That's where every dissertation in this country, master's degree, right in that particular place. It's called the University of Microfilms Incorporated. It's at Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it houses all of the dissertations of every university in America. Most of the stuff now is more digital. When we was doing it, everything was, hard copies. So, if you wanted the dissertation, you had to pay for it, page by page. Because some of them are already printed, and most of them are not. Because most masters or PhD, they'll go out and take it and make a book out of it. But a lot of them don't. So it just sit there until somebody's doing research, they need that particular information, they go and they retrieve that material. But one of the good things is that when you're doing research, these are repositories, these are references where you can go and find material on all kinds of subject matters. And the issue is, it ain't in the bookstore. You ain't gonna, unless you really know the subject matter and looking for specific information, that's the only way you're gonna find that kind of information. Yes?
Yeah, can you repeat that?
The University of Microfilms Incorporated.
Thank you.
And what you do is when you put on regard to dissertations or master's dissertations, you'll find out that, or thesis, you'll find out that most of all that material is housed in one particular central located area. But again, this is where I first was introduced to that particular kind of information. And then I began to realize that there were two stories about the nation. There was the story that the nation told, and then there was a story that the local authorities told. Because they had a certain amount of information. I mean, remember, they had contact of him from 1932. But when I went and got his FBI files, it was 379 pages. Out of those 379 pages, you know when the dossier started, Mike? Okay, 3 minutes. 1952. Now, how is a dossier on the individual who left in 32? And so, in other words, where was they getting their info? You get what I'm saying? Here was a guy who had over 100 aliases. So, again, what I just did was gave you a basic overview of the background of the history. In the next view, we're only going to deal with Malcolm and the assassination and that particular documentary. A lot of the material is just overlap. That means that a lot of the material that you see in regard to anything about Malcolm is overlap. Believe me, I know it. Most of the documents that are known, I know where they come from. I know the people that you got them from and so forth and so on. But the thing that a lot of times that get misconstrued in all of this is the people who was at the event and listen to what they say. Not what the reporters say, not what some joker who wrote a book say, but what the individual who was there said. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of us, we want to reinterpret that. So, break time.
Okay, we got super croissants. Everybody coming to the kitchen over here to your left.
While people are coming back, what you need to know is Brother Trust is one of the foremost when it comes to the history or a history of the Nation of Islam. There are three individuals, the top three, I believe, in my humble opinion: Zach Kondo, Paul Lee, and Professor Trust Graham. Those are the three. If you want to make it a fourth, then it would be Carl Evans would be the other one. But those are the three. And this, if you want to know the real history, a real thorough history over 5 hours, is right here. You're not going to get that tonight. Trust does not have the time to really explain the history of the nation. You will not find this anywhere else where you could actually sit down and learn and actually in a very real way get the history of the nation. So while you having your soup after, the thing, you need to buy this. How much it costs, Trust?
It's 10.
That's all?
$10?
Yes, sir.
How many,
It would take you, it probably would take you so many
one
books.
this or two?
It's over 5 hours. This is over 5 hours. This is incredible that he's only selling it for $10. Cause I'm trying to think, when I first bought it, it might have been more. But you getting away, trust me, if you get this for $10 and you don't feel satisfied, I will buy it back from you. Trust me, you ain't gotta worry. I'll buy it back from you. If you can tell me with a straight face,
Yeah, I'm good.
after you watch 5 hours of this,
Yeah, I'm good.
and you ain't learned nothing about the nation,
Yeah, I'll do that.
I'll buy it back.
I'll do that.
It's not a problem. Okay, so,
Should we finish?
should we personal right now? No. As a matter of fact, unless Ray gonna be on the side, or I'll be on the side. Ray, you got other things to do, right? I'll be on the side right now. I'll come in the back. Trust is getting ready to start his lecture right now because he's only scratched the surface. He only got 45 minutes to explain the assassination to you. So I'll be in the back. If you could quietly come up to me without disturbing the group, you can just hand me $10 and I can hand you the tape and you can go right back to your seat. So we'll do that now. Let's bring back Trust Grant with a handshake.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Mike. I appreciate that 100%. And it's always, good to make sure that we share the information. And I want to say this up front. The DVD is over 30 years old. So it's a little grainy because remember, at that time, there was only VHS. So, it's been used over, quite a few years. So, but all of the information, 100% accurate and good. Now, the time that we get into is really going to be the period of what we would call the most sought after time period, that most people, I would say, focus on in the Nation of Islam. Because one of the things that happened in that process from Elijah coming and developing and then to the point of Malcolm's eventually demise is that the organization as an economic entity began also to grow. Farms and land and different kinds of businesses, grocery stores and cleaners and manufacturers and trucking companies. It was just crazy off the hook. As a matter of fact, when when Elijah died, the Jet magazine came out with a major article, and the title was $80 million organization, or so forth and so on. And people were all like $80 million back then. This is 1975 now. $80 million, and what? And then when Wallace D eventually takes over, he finds out that, man, these jokers owe everybody in the neighborhood. They owed so much money that the problem was being able to have the organization function on a daily basis and at the same time be able to pay half the people they owe. So what Wallace D, the first thing he did was he started selling stuff off. Just to pay the debts. Because all of the adventures they went into, a lot of them were handshakes. There wasn't no changing or exchange of cash flow. And remember, people get this idea that the relationship between Gaddafi and the Nation of Islam was Farrakhan. He wasn't even around when that jumped off. The first relationship with Gaddafi was with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's how they got that mosque in Chicago. Not because of Farrakhan. Remember, Farrakhan is the recipient of that mosque. He didn't go out and buy it. Prior to that, it was a Greek Orthodox church. Yeah. And that's where the foundation of it came. But one of the reasons why, because a lot of people really, when the nation began to grow, especially when Malcolm came into play, when the nation began to grow, Muslims around the world began to who is that? Like, what are they doing? And this really changed the demographics. But y'all got to remember is this, that one of the major things that changes also, once Malcolm gets into the nation, the very character, the personality of the nation begins to shift. All of them old Christians that I told you about, they began to take either senior positions in the organization or back seats. Your super chief. Thank you. And what that did was it gave room for the new converts to come in. And the new converts were like, you know, the regular rank and file, blue collar individuals, but a lot of them were individuals that come out of the correctional facilities. Because see, Malcolm began, while he was in the institution, remember, he actually, he lives with his sister from 14 until he's 20. He goes in the penitentiary at 21. And remember, he do 6 years, 5.5, 6 years, and then he come out. When he comes out, he goes to live with his brother, Wilfred, because that's the only stable place that the parole board is going to allow him to go. And when he goes there, before he even gets to his brother's house, he leaves the penitentiary, he writes a letter to Elijah. And Elijah say, look, as soon as you get out, you come and see me. And as you also, in Spike Lee's movie, this particular event is a major episode in the movie. You know, where he meets Elijah and he's crying, and, you know, Denzel going through that whole thing, and he goes through the clean glass, dirty glass water scenario, and all of this is setting the stage for Malcolm becoming the #1 follower. I mean, the #1. One thing that Elijah can't say, there was nobody in the Nation of Islam at that time or up until now that was more dedicated to Elijah than Malcolm. Nobody. That's including Farrakhan, all of them. You put them all together, they don't have an ounce of what Malcolm gave to Elijah. Not even a little bit. And this is unconditional. Unconditional. See, y'all, there are individuals who looked at Elijah in a lofty, godly concept, but Malcolm believed that. He really believed it. So his position was, this is real. He's really a prophet. He was really a messenger. He is really a holy man. That's how he looked at him. And what Malcolm did for the nation is beyond comparable. There's nobody else that could have done what this man did, damn near single-handedly. I mean, when you talk about what the FOI is and how it performs and what it represents, its image, its outlook, that's Malcolm. When you think about the image of the FOI, this is the image that you would get back in the day. It's Captain Joseph right here. This is Mosque number 7 in New York. He eventually changes his name to Yusuf Shah.
Yeah.
And he becomes Malcolm's #1 nemesis.
Yep.
That's right.
I literally found him in the garbage can.
Right. That's what Malcolm said. I found him in the garbage can in Detroit. And he said, yeah, that's where I found him.
Yep, literally the garbage.
That's right. And most of the individuals know that's the creator. This is another picture. See this picture here? That's Lottie. That's Elijah Muhammad's daughter. The joker up in the right-hand corner, that's Raymond Sharif. That's who she married. He's #1 FOI Supreme Captain, top dog.
Yeah.
Right. There's only one guy in the nation that supersedes him in guerrilla warfare and don't even answer to him. He only answered to Elijah. And that's Elijah Muhammad Jr. We used to call him the hitman. Listen, if he come and visit you, it ain't because he want to talk. You can believe that. Seriously. That's not his MO at no time. That means he coming and you going to feel some burn. You know.
Or as they used to say, get blessed.
You get blessed. That's right. We're going to bless him tonight. Now, see these pictures here? What makes this magazine such a gem in itself and a historical document is, as you can see, it's Life magazine. And it says Negro photographs shooting from inside the black Muslims. But you know who did this article? Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks is probably one of the greatest Africans that ever existed in America.
Was he a photographer?
No, he was a Renaissance man. He did everything. He was a photographer, a director, a writer. Listen, there wasn't nothing that he did. He played concert piano. He was just everything. And plus he was Bubby Johnson right here, man.
That's right, I'm gonna say.
Shit. Him and Bubby like that. And any time that he caused some problem, the first thing that happened, if Malcolm had some beef, the first thing they say, Bubby say, you want me to handle that for you? Remember, Bubby was hard as a rock. Nobody was going to push him, except one person. Madam Stephanie Sinclair.
Come on with it.
Madam Stephanie Sinclair was the baddest black woman this side of the Mississippi, goddamn.
Come on with it, brother.
She was so bad that every white boy in America that was a gangster wanted her job.
That's right.
White boys ain't know nothing about no damn number running. Number running came at the behest of the excess for those individuals who were in, at that time, because when you talk about Chicago and those places, they were just, Roman gangs. There's no organized crime did not have anything to do with Chicago. Don't get it twisted. Organized crime is New York City.
Yeah, Al Capone. Al Capone came from New York.
No, he didn't. He was born in New York, but he
got ran out. Yeah,
that's right. He made all of his claim to fame in Chicago because he was a strong arm joker in the gangs. That's what he did. He was a beatdown artist. He was like John Gotti. You know, he would just go down, beat jokers down. That was his MO. And then what they did was they brought him in and he decided that he was going to take over the whole operation. There was another guy before him, I can't remember his name, but he was the guy that taught everybody. I can't remember his name right now, but there's a few different, setups because you had the Italian boys. Well, let me back it up. You had the Sicilian, then you had the Italians, and then you had the Jewish boys. So the Sicilians, how it come up is that those are the individuals who started the black market crime first. But what happened is that when the organized aspect of it comes in, it transformed these gangs into organized units that operate efficiently. And the reason that they created what they called the syndicate, and it was created by Lucky Luciano. It was created because they all knew one thing. We all stealing, but we just don't want to step on each other's toes doing it. There's another event that happened just the same way. It's called the Berlin Conference. These is all white boys stealing countries. They going around the world and they stealing countries. So what they do is we all get together and we sit down and we going to strategize how we going to steal it. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that I don't step in your area and you don't step in her area and she don't step in my area and we all going to steal happily all ever together. That's what colonization and the Berlin Conference did. They created Africa like a cake, cut it up, and literally we are the direct result of that. You see? And the reality is that all of this stems from what we are talking about now. It is the part of that whole scenario. But Malcolm, what he also does is that he literally changes, as I said, the character. Because prior to that, even if you look at the dress of the Nation of Islam, you look at the catechism of the Nation of Islam, it's very different. It's more churchy-like. It has that churchy feeling, But after Malcolm gets into the game, it becomes sure enough military. I mean, top notch, it's like you can bounce a quarter off the bed kind of thing. I mean, he is that kind of individual because he knows that his major concern is recruiting, but he begins to go after this issue that Elijah drives hard, and that is rehabilitation. We want to change the black man, and it's all about identity. It's all about identity. Remember, self-knowledge is about identity. Do for self, identity. You know, to control your own destiny, education, culture, religion, and most of all, God. Let me take that back. He got a little problem with that one. But that became an issue. It became a major issue. And Malcolm, like I said, he was like the guy.
Blood transfusion.
Oh, bro. I mean, he literally just woke everything up. And it did one of the things, the greatest thing it did for Elijah was it gave him some freedom, not have to be under all of that pressure all of the time. So he got to be able to do some things that normally he wouldn't have time to do. Be with his family, you know, all of those kind of things. And the other thing was money started to come in. I mean, like leaps and bounds. Y'all do know that the financial infrastructure of the Nation of Islam was literally financed 90 times the percent from the East Coast. In other words, Chicago, Detroit, none of them had the kind of, you know, financial infrastructure that facilitated the necessary needs of the nation at that time. It all came from Newark. It all came from New York. It all came from Philadelphia. It all came from Boston. Baltimore, that's right. But those are the mosques that literally began to raise their, how can I say, their membership rates, and also they began to go into areas that other individuals didn't. So if you remember this, those that were around at the time, the Nation of Islam in the Muhammad Speaks they used to have, as you notice, let me just do this. This is Muhammad Speaks. Y'all see that?
Yeah.
This is a Muhammad Speaks. Y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
These different papers now. Muhammad Speaks. Muhammad Speaks. This is Final Call. But this is the second Final Call. Y'all do know that. Anybody ever heard of the first Final Call?
No.
The first Final Call was actually called the Final Call to Islam. It came out in 1932. It was a newsletter, really. And that's where he got it. Now, according to the story, Farrakhan said he came up with this title, the masthead of this newspaper, in a dream. Hey, that's what he said. I said, stop lying. You got it from the mothership.
Mothership.
Y'all, come on now. Y'all know about that.
Oh.
Now, the reason I'm saying that is because the paper that I just showed you, this paper that I showed you, and this paper that I showed you, Elijah Muhammad had nothing to do with none of them. No. Mm-mm. This paper is called Muhammad Speaks Continues. It was brought into existence by this individual here. That's John Muhammad, the brother of Elijah Muhammad.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This newspaper here is also called Muhammad Speaks. But this newspaper was developed by Silas Muhammad out of Atlanta, Georgia, who actually came up with one of the first books that went to the UN on reparations. Did you know that? Yes, Silas Muhammad. This newspaper here, see this newspaper here?
Yeah, it's one.
No, it's not.
No?
This is the evolvement of the original Muhammad Speaks. Look, the Muhammad Speaks, when he took over, it changed from Muhammad Speaks to the Balalian News.
Yeah.
Then it changed from Balalian News to the Muslim Journal, then American Muslim Journal, and then they wiped it out. That's how it happened. This is why I say people don't realize that the Nation of Islam that you see today under Minister Farrakhan is not Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam. That does not exist anymore. It's gone. The Nation of Islam that you see today under Minister Farrakhan came into existence in 1977 at the behest of two major individuals that helped bring Farrakhan what they call Adam mothballs, because from what I remember, he was painting houses and smoking cigars. Farrakhan was. And it was Khalid, Abdul Muhammad, and Jabril, who they call Bernard Kushmir, were the individual. He wrote a book, early book is called This Is the One. You always see it in the newspaper. It's one of the earliest books written, you know, inside the Nation of Islam. But again, these are all newspapers that come out and develop in regard to that. And let me say again, y'all, now anybody ever seen Elijah Muhammad's Muhammad Speaks? Everybody see Elijah Muhammad's Muhammad Speaks newspaper? Y'all seen it before? Right, okay. Now, I want to say this clearly. Elijah Muhammad had no Muhammad Speaks newspaper. Y'all like he doing it again. As you know, Elijah had nothing to do with making no newspapers. That particular newspaper was the brainchild of two individuals, Louis Lomax
And Malcolm.
and Malcolm. The first introduction to any public viewing pertaining to the Nation of Islam was at the behest of Louis Lomax. Yes, sir.
Malcolm had another person who helped him start the Concord, who used to live right here in Brooklyn, Sylvester Lease.
Well, Sylvester Lease was there, but he didn't have the, how can I say, the brainchild, how can I say, the mechanics in regard to structuring, framework, all of that kind of stuff. And the reason that was because Malcolm had already been working with Louis Lomax, because they wrote a book. He wrote a book on the nation, but actually he wanted to write it on Malcolm. It's called When the Word Was Given. And in that book, that's the first book that gives any information about John Ali and his particular intelligence relationship. Because see, right now, the biggest issue in regard to that documentary is about the individuals who were either informants or agents working for the state. And most of the individuals that did it, what they did was they gave lip service, or they accused individuals without evidence. The first person that I ever known to make any accusations in regard to that was Carl Evans. Carl Evans was the individual, because I asked Zach about it. He said, shit, I don't know where you got it. He said, ain't no FBI. I said, I didn't see the shit. He said, well, how you come up with that? He said, well, he got that from The Word Is Given. You go in there and they tell you that he was a naval intelligence officer. Because you were a naval intelligence officer, it don't tell you what rank you had or how high up the food chain you was. How many people ever read William Cooper book? Right.
Yeah.
Where was he in the naval intelligence? What level was he?
Oh, they never mentioned.
No, he's a nobody, nothing. One thing you ain't got to ever worry about. If you of any significance, they ain't going to let you write no damn book. You can believe that. That's for real. That's why two things you ain't going to ever see. You ain't going to ever see an ex-president leave this country. No time. They ain't going to move to Florida, move to Russia, or I'm going to go live in Spain. That shit ain't going to ever happen. Right. No. See, and y'all get this idea that when they get Secret Service for life, it's because they want them protected. It don't got nothing to do with their protection. They don't want their asses revealing all them top secret information that they got, and they know that if they don't monitor these jokers, they might go around and give to the wrong person. So y'all running around thinking that they protecting them, they really making sure that they ain't doing the wrong freaking thing.
Protecting themselves.
Because you know, once they find, oh yeah, they ain't gonna ask you no questions. They just gonna say, oh man, he had a rough problem. He had a heart attack last night. Y'all know that?
Yeah. That's right.
Oh, he slipped on a banana.
He came down with cancer or something.
Or you could be walking dead like Mitch O'Connell.
Who?
Mitch, you know Mitch, the guy that looked like he dead but still walking around with glasses on. I be asking myself, what that Chinese girl see in this boy? Because he one ugly looking joker. I mean, really.
Money and power.
Money and power, right?
That's right.
But all of this created the significance in regard to again, Malcolm having this particular input inside the nation. And what happened is that because Elijah put so much faith and trust in him, everybody else got jealous over that shit. They got jealous like leaps and bounds. And Malcolm's position was he was so tunnel vision. He was so driven by what the nation and what Elijah was about. A lot of stuff he wasn't even thinking. He wasn't even zeroing in on this stuff was piling up around him. He didn't realize it. Betty tried to tell him, take your head out the damn ground. But he wouldn't deal with it.
He could make you a minister or he could sit you down.
That's right. That was what it was always about. But the thing that I believe, again, the thing that I believe that was the final straw in regard to why Malcolm did what he did and all of that had nothing to do with the situation that they say. Again, this is just Truss's analysis. So don't get it twisted and, you know. My analysis is that the reason why Malcolm was so infuriated with the issues about those particular offspring that Elijah created by those particular secretaries was because of a personal issue. Had nothing to do with the women. And the reason I say that is because Malcolm, as well as Wallace D. and a lot of those individuals were aware of them children way before that. They knew it. The only thing is, nobody never said nothing about it. It was never an issue of, you know, this is small talk, or we going, that's the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you leave that alone. But when it became a personal issue, it was. So y'all go check this out. Write this down. You write this down. I want y'all to go look up a woman named Evelyn Williams.
No doubt, no doubt.
Evelyn Williams.
No doubt.
Evelyn Williams was a woman who actually Malcolm was going to marry before he married Betty.
That's right.
It was a real major issue because that guy I just showed you, Yusef Shah, Captain Joseph, he was like, if Elijah wanted to know, I mean, if Malcolm wanted to know, you know, what was the sentiments of where Elijah was, he would go to Yusef Shah because Yusef Shah had that kind of, you know, with the individuals in Mosque number 2 and everything. And the guy who was also a very close confidant of that individual was a guy by the name of James Shabazz. Not James Shabazz from Newark, but James Shabazz from Chicago. Every time you see him with a lot of places with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and you'll see him most of the time in the background. And him and his, I don't think it's in this book. Him and his family members are always in the background where he's standing, but he is the individual that if anything is said, done, or anything, he's the point person for him. In this picture, it's hard to see him because he's right there, but they got a picture in here where he's standing behind, yeah, here he is. This is Herbert Muhammad, this is Elijah Muhammad, and that's James Shabazz right there. Boy, he did not play no games. The guy who was the strong-arm individual for Elijah, if he wanted, you know, to bust some knuckles, was his son. So he would take Elijah Jr. and say, look, this joke over here, you know, he ain't sell his quota of papers or something or whatever. You know, y'all need to go speak to the individual. Now, Elijah Muhammad Jr. was this guy that Raymond Sharif, nobody controlled him. So if he came to your mosque, you knew that, bro, you was going to get handled because something going on that we don't like. So in most mosques, there were certain individuals who were the top, you know, rough-up guys. In mosque number 12 in Boston, it was Clarence Gill. Clarence Gill was like, oh, you didn't sell your quota this week, huh? Somebody needs a blessing tonight, Mike. You know? We're going to go out and pray. Come on, let's go. That was his MO. See, because we had this idea that every time we see, you know, Muslims selling newspapers on the street, that they was actually selling the paper. Well, Yo, bro, come to find out, jokers have papers like this in their closets.
Right.
Go open up their back car, the trunk be full of papers, you know. And see, Elijah and them, they found this out real quick. One thing they found out is that they found out that the circulation had a real important impact. Because how they started this was, Elijah, after he created the Final Call of Islam, and Elijah used to write during that particular paper, and at that time when they had that Final Call, it was a newsletter just like this size. And he would write the material in it, but anytime he referred to Master Farad Muhammad, he would always call him the Prophet. And then what happened is that as time went on, that newspaper, you know, ceased to exist. So what they did was they came up with 2 articles that they wrote. One was called God's Angry Men, and the other one was called The Messenger. And they took those 2 articles and they put them in the Pittsburgh Courier, the Los Angeles Herald-Dispatch, you know, the Chicago Defender, and they took those newspapers and they went out and they became the sellers of those newspapers. And the subscriptions went up by leaps and bounds. And Elijah looked at that and said, oh, wait a minute, what the hell are we doing? So they decided that it was in their best interest to come up with something that they themselves could control, operate, and seek the revenue. So when Louis Lomax and Malcolm got together, and Mr. Leaks, as the brother said, got together and created this particular organ, what they began to realize is that how they can maintain the infrastructure of the organization. But one of the things that they found out in the descriptions was that how they would sell the newspapers is that you would come to the mosque, and what would happen is that I would give you 50 papers, and you would have to come back with $50. You get it? Now, the issue was that a lot of times the papers were given up front. And there was there was a lot of times, like I told you, because they had papers they couldn't sell, they couldn't pay for the papers. So they've been getting caught, you know, in the middle with not selling all the papers, so the revenue wasn't coming in. So Elijah came up with a new plan. And you know what that was? Sell the papers to the mosque. Which means what? The papers are sold. That means that in the record, that means every paper that Muhammad created was sold. That made it one of the best newspapers in the country. The only problem is that how you got those papers, you had to pay up front. And you know what that meant? If you didn't sell them, you ate them. Great business deal. That's right, I was getting ready to say, it wasn't for you, but, you know. But on paper, it looked great. So the nation went around with one of the most circulated newspapers damn near in history. The only other newspaper I know that sold more than that in circulation and in so many places was the Negro World. And remember that, I mean, what Marcus Garvey did with the Negro World, there's no newspaper I know, black, was able to do that kind of stuff. The only newspaper that get that kind of credibility on the global is the New York Times. Where you go anywhere and somebody say New York Times and they know what you're talking about. You know, in the Renaissance, if you went to Brazil, you knew what a freaking Negro World was. If you went to Puerto Rico or Cuba, you knew what a Negro World was. See, we think that when we think of Marcus Garvey, we think of New York and we think of America. No, that's not how that rolled. Remember, over damn near 2.5 million membership, 3 continents. They didn't have radio yet.
No internet, no radio.
That's cold. Yes, sir.
I know that what they call the Harlem Renaissance, Du Bois and so forth. I mean, the crisis was like once a week and it maybe sold a couple of thousand in Metro New York. But Negro World was worldwide, 3 different languages, but somehow that's left out of the quote-unquote Harlem Renaissance. It was really Garvey that made the Harlem Renaissance.
Well, you know what, the reason that is because, remember, the Harlem Renaissance is looked at from an intellectual point of view. It's not looked at as a grassroots. So when we talk about the Harlem Renaissance and we talk about the great individuals of that particular, the great practitioners, they call it the period of the New Negro. Who they get that title to? They give it to Alain Locke.
Yeah.
Alain Locke ain't know nothing about no new Negroes. It was Hubert Harrison that brought that whole concept. That's a fact. That's not even, there's nobody during the Harlem Renaissance would question that. But you got individuals who writing books now that say that Alain Locke is the father of the new Negro movement. That's a fact. And it did not happen. Most of the new Negro movement wasn't literary individuals. They were revolutionaries. Marcus Garvey, A. Philip Randolph, Chandler Owen, Cyril Briggs. These are all of the super jokers. These are some of the most intellectual bad individuals that ever exist. Cyril Briggs created the African Blood Brotherhood. You wouldn't know nothing about Tulsa, Oklahoma if it wasn't for them.
That's right.
Monroe Trotter. These is bad brothers.
Yes, sir.
Ida B. Wells.
Yeah. That's right.
Zora Neale Hurston.
That's right.
I'm talking about individuals who was in the trenches doing the grind. Wasn't taking no shorts. And when you talk about Harlem Renaissance, it didn't just happen in Harlem. Look at Claretta Bass, the American Eagle, black woman on a freaking newspaper in California.
That's right.
She was bad. She read the newspaper by her damn self half the time. Serious. Go ahead.
Focus back to Evelyn Williams. Was she like the Yoko Ono of the Nation?
See that? He's only a comedian would say yo. So let's get back to that real quick because we getting close. The issue is in Evelyn Williams. Evelyn Williams was this woman that Malcolm wanted to marry.
That's right.
And the problem was that there was a protocol in the Nation of Islam for getting married. You know, if you wanted to marry in the Nation of Islam, there was a protocol. The woman had to be half your age and 7.
Yes. That's right.
You know that you couldn't marry, if you wanted to marry her, no, she too tall. You can't marry a woman taller than you.
Yeah.
No. A light-skinned individual marrying a light-skinned individual, no. You know what Elijah called it? Grafting backwards.
Oh, damn.
That's right.
So Evelyn, she was this really high, light-skinned, yellow individual. And y'all know what Malcolm was. He was so, they called him red.
Hey.
And the guy that told him that Elijah wasn't going to like it was Yusef Shah. He said, man, you know, Elijah, the message ain't going to like that.
So he's going to prove that.
That's right. And he got really kind of spooked about it. So what did he do? He went to his sister Ella and asked her. Because see, Ella was his like conscience. Because she wasn't always down with the Muslim, none of that. She was down with her. And bruh, she had it going on, believe me. But she was a thinker of their family, you know. And it was Ella that introduced Evelyn to him. And he really liked this girl. So what had happened was, when he got her, talked to her about it, and she was like, go with your heart, you know, if you like her, do what you. And when he started thinking about it, and he thinking about Elijah and all of that, and he said to himself, no, I better not do this. So he decided that he gonna break off the relationship. Every time he would get to the podium and speak, she'd be sitting right there. And he'd be looking at it, and he'd be like, damn, you know. So he got so pissed about the whole situation, he decided that he wanted her to stay in the Nation, but she couldn't stay here. So what did he do? He sent her to Chicago. Elijah put it in secretarial pool.
Yeah.
He got her pregnant.
That's right. Yep. Drove me crazy.
To me, this is trust again. Nobody, very seldom, you ain't gonna see too many documentaries talking about what I'm telling you. You ain't see too many, there's a few books that talk about it, but they don't talk about it the way that I believe it should be done. Claude Clegg, he talks about it a bit in his book. And
Marvel does.
yeah, Manning Marable, a lot of the material he got in his book, he didn't get, well, let's say that it wasn't his legwork, let's put it like that. Because a lot of the legwork, a lot of the material also come from Abdul Rahman, you know that? That's right. And especially a lot of that stuff on Al-Mustafa Shabazz, you know. But Evelyn Williams that I believe, that's what created the camel that broke the back. Because when Malcolm found that out, he was really like, what the hell? I sent her there for safekeeping, and you get her pregnant.
That's right.
So to me, that would be more of a spark to say, well, oh, wait a minute. I mean, we could do a lot of things. You can do anything you want to, long as it ain't messing with me, we good. You know? But now you do me personally. Malcolm was like, oh man. Yes, sir.
How old was Malcolm when he found that out?
How old?
Yes, how old was Malcolm when he found out that information?
Ooh.
And how old was
35.
Wow. Because remember, it would have to be between probably like 36 and 39.
So was it true that Malcolm stated that Elijah got teenage secretaries?
No, it wasn't true. It's not true. They were not teenagers. Teenagers inferring that they're underage. The ones he got pregnant, they were grown women.
Well, see, the thing is
At the
that
age of Sister Tynetta was a grown woman. Evelyn by then was at least about 20 years old. None of them were like 16, 17. Malcolm made the inference that they were like 17-year-old little girls. They were not. And I don't defend Elijah Muhammad. They were grown. In other words, all of them were over 18, and most of them was like about 20 or 21. So
the issue here to me is, personally, I don't really care about the age. It's the infidelity that I'm dealing with. And the issue was, the reason I'm dealing with the infidelity because, you know, the nation's explanation for the situation was they were his wives. That was their explanation. Now, my position is, I don't have no problem with that. But if y'all had a history of polygamy in the Nation of Islam, I'd give you the benefit of the doubt, but it wasn't. And then second, I ain't never heard Clara say nothing like that. The only person that I know that was legitimately his wife is her. And she ain't never came out publicly and never at no time said that none of those women was his wives, at no time. And never supported. Matter of fact, she left him twice over it. Remember, she ended up going to Egypt with her son, Akbar. And it's Akbar that sent her back to her father, to his father. See, a lot of them don't know what role Akbar played. Yes, sir, what you want to say?
Is that the reason why you state that the nation prior to Malcolm was more churchy than Muslim?
I would say that, and it's still churchy. And the reason that is that all you got to do is go and see what book they read from the most.
Bible.
That's all you got to do. And that's not to say, even in regard to the new, and this is why I say that is because when we look at the nation now, it's not the same. It's different. You know, in Farrakhan's nation, you got women that's ministers. Elijah wasn't having that.
Right.
But no women ministers. Yes, sir.
It seems like you got a problem with a female teaching.
No, I don't. Wait a minute, what did I tell y'all in the beginning of this lecture? About history and personality and what my feelings for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is. Right.
Yeah,
and
but
it's not an issue. That's not an
sexist
issue. The issue is what I'm saying is that we're not saying that a woman shouldn't be a minister. I'm saying that Elijah was saying that. He was saying no woman should be a minister. But that's not what Farrakhan is saying. Is it true? Is that? Is Farrakhan saying that?
He's not saying that.
Oh, okay then. Then what I'm saying is that, wait a minute, hold on. And what that means is that he has detoured from Elijah Muhammad's teachings, as he would say. Go ahead.
At the same time, when Elijah Muhammad was present, he didn't allow female ministers at that time. It appears to me it was to get us to a certain level in our growth and understanding. where we should be as a people prior to slavery. And-
Yeah, but again, I understand what you're saying, but it's just you just trying to justify. All I'm saying is that the two events happened.
Because
Trust, let him finish, let him finish.
the women that are here right now and outside these meetings don't like to hear any form of oppression that comes from any male that has a mentality of keeping women in the back or beneath us. So this is why now women have a voice. So it seems to be in accord with the will of what we call God, that women now have a greater voice than any other time period. Okay?
Yeah, well, I'm saying is that
we all agree here, regardless of our age, this was a man's world for millions of years.
nobody would negate that. But what I'm saying is that in every hold on.
Still is.
We're still shutting women's eyes.
Additionally,
Right,
In
Lord?
the name of what Elijah stated.
What's the question, bro?
Go ahead, my dear.
I just want to say, you have to be careful with this feminist stuff,
Thank you.
because, you know, the men have a role and the women have a role. It's not putting the woman down, but it's like certain ideas that this society puts out, we're starting to adapt them, and it might not be for our benefit. So just be careful with some ideas.
Rich.
Are there any LGBTQ ministers?
Rich. Come on, everybody. Hold on, everybody. Go ahead, Mike, what you need?
See, the thing is, and I'm listening to both of you, Trust, and I think both of you can be right at the same time. See, when you say that Elijah Muhammad did not permit it, you're right. The obvious reason is, just go back to when Elijah was there was no such thing. So you're right. I think what the brother's trying to say is that Minister Farrakhan, as an extension of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, grew to that point, because I think I've heard Minister Farrakhan rationalize that at that time, men had to be pushed up front because it would have been like the church. If men wasn't pushed up front, the women would have taken over the nation. And they, obviously under Elijah Muhammad, that would never happen.
But Mike,
So
think of that
that's what he's
rationale.
saying.
Yeah, but think of that rationale. I mean, that don't even, come on.
I'm just saying what's being said, brother.
Yeah, I agree with
I'm
you.
not saying that I agree with it.
Yeah, I understand.
But I'm just saying that I think that what he's saying is that Minister Farrakhan, I'm not going to say it's enlightenment, but I'm just saying he's
well, you
not.
you can say evolve, grow, whatever you
He
want.
has evolved. He has
The
evolved.
issue is that the issue for me is that no matter how you slice it, it's different than what you're
Yes,
doing.
no doubt.
That's all I'm saying.
No doubt.
And the issue is that at that time, I'm just saying, if they would have suggested it, I'm pretty sure it would not have got too much mileage. I'm just saying.
No,
it's
you're
just
right.
that-
But I'm agreeing with you for
Yeah,
all
and
the reasons you saying.
Right, and I'm not saying, and I'm not saying that it's not good for Minister Farrakhan or the organization to grow. As a matter of fact, I think it's a good thing, because very few religions grow in any way. Very few.
So the
Right,
point I
yeah.
was trying to say is that I think y'all are both right and y'all are both making sound points. And you know yourself how even with the selling of newspapers, how you would get that visit, you know, at some point from somebody, you know, after a warning or whatever, you know something's gonna happen. But I'm just saying under Minister Farrakhan, it's less of that. Because, you know, he just doing things different. Which buttress your point about it's a different nation.
Yeah, that too, but the issue is that the goings on inside the inside of Farrakhan's nation today is a little less accessible than it was in regard to certain kind of individuals back in the day. And the reason that is that pretty much all you had to do is have a clean shirt and a halfway decent, and you can slide in. You know, today it's not as easy to do it like that. You know, because they checking you. I mean, they really checking individuals that's coming in. Yeah, go ahead, my brother.
Use the language slide in.
Say that
The language you use slide in, decent, so-and-so. It appears to me you're making it real cheap how to come into the nation. when Malcolm and everyone that comes to the nation back then, they gotta go through a process, a class to join the nation. It's a class that you actually go through. You don't slide in like church. In church, you slide in, look a certain way, halfway decent, you in. But in the nation, you don't slide in like that.
Bro, let me explain. How old are you? How old are you? How old are you?
I'm 47 years old.
Me, I'm 65.
And where you
Wait a minute, hold on. Not only, look, see this is my mother's name. This is my mother's message to the black man.
I got you.
Your mother? Yes.
Sister Jean Hadex, right there. See that?
Yes, sir.
Right. You know what this is? 1965.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Now,
Now, now, what? The issue is, let me just explain. The issue of getting into the nation during that time was a lot easier than getting into the nation now in regard to protocol. You don't have to, look, what I'm saying is that at that time, they were looking for recruits.
Right.
And most of all, you had, and one of the biggest problems you had with individuals, whether it was in certain kind of house, like the one I was in, Newark, Philadelphia, or Onwood. Listen, you talk about rehabilitation, you went to a class, all of that. I'm telling individuals that would be able to get into an organization and do things that were really undesirable because the protocol and everything was lax. Individuals were allowed all kinds of things. In mosque number 25, you had jokers that were selling drugs, prostitution, cocaine, what do you call all of this? Stick up individuals. They actually broke within inside the organization and created an organization called New World of Islam. You had James Scott, the box on land with Robin Banks. In 1972, you had the zebra killings. You ever heard about that in California? Yeah. These are activities that took place within inside the organization from individuals who already had bad backgrounds from the beginning. And the problem was, nobody, as time went on, because the individuals who got in here came from that environment, they gave them access. I'm not saying what you're saying is disregarding the protocol. Yes, there was a protocol, but everybody didn't follow that like it was some military. They just didn't. And that's why it was so easy for individuals to come in and infiltrate. It was so easy for individuals to come in and literally dismantle it. If that wasn't the case, then Elijah, the Nation of Islam, the way it would be here right today. But that's not the case. And again, bro, I'm not saying in disregarding. I'm just saying is that at that time, as you indicated, it was a different time, and they were allowing different things to take place, even though the protocol was in place. That's all I'm saying. Say that again?
Next question, anybody?
Oh, anybody?
We got 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Ooh, God, in 10 minutes.
Can you go back to Akbar?
Trust me, get that assassination?
Yeah, I'm trying. Go ahead. Yeah.
I have one unrelated point.
Go ahead.
Earlier, where can I get a book on Queen Charlotte?
Oh, you know what? Call me on that one, and I'm gonna give you some info on it. I got some up-to-date stuff on it.
Okay.
But what I was just getting ready to say in regard to that, again, what I believe that was the significant catalyst that broke the back was that particular event with Evelyn Williams. And with Evelyn Williams, because it was a personal issue, this is why I believe Malcolm went out in regard to that and began to look at and investigate the case. Now, mind you, up until that time, he never said anything about it publicly. Never said no word about it. As a matter of fact, most people that write about it say that the only person that he actually told about it was Minister Farrakhan. He was the only person that he actually told. But the issue was that as it began to fester, all of the other things that were going on around him also began to develop. Nepotism, jealousy, all of these things began to inject themselves into the equation. And eventually, what happened is that those individuals who were closest to Elijah began to penetrate that ironclad faith that Elijah had in Malcolm. Because Malcolm wasn't just like run-of-the-mill, supporter. He was the number one, not because Malcolm said that or the nation said it, because Elijah said that he was my number one. And then what that did and exemplified to the world was that me and him wanted the same. This is why most individuals didn't realize that the impact psychologically that it had on Malcolm when those things began to unfold. Because remember, he had him in such this lofty position, and then it took him down a couple of pegs. And his position was, wait a minute, I you know, something ain't right here. So what did he do? He go back and read the Bible. He didn't go to the Quran, he went and got to the Bible and tried to find some justifications for what was taking place. And him and his own wife was talking about it. But after that whole situation, that literally created the atmosphere that Minister Farrakhan alludes to in regard to the climate that created the situation that eventually unfolded. The situation in regard to the documentary that was just recently done was that the conclusion, most of the material that was in the documentary is old hash. It's just old material put in a new packaging. The only thing that I found that was new out of that whole documentary was one, some numbers. There was most of us that did research knew that when Malcolm was killed, there were either informants or agents in the audience. The only problem was we didn't know how many. We never knew. There was a statement that was made to it, but it was never eluded. There was never alluded to what and how much. But in this new documentary, in an affidavit, in a FBI file, as well as in a statement by one of the police detectives, Lieutenant Bosa, that it was 9 individuals. That's a lot.
9 informants?
9, that's correct, yes. Informants. Now, we want to make that clear that informants, not agents.
Right.
Informants, not agents. So people understand what they actually were doing and what they were capable of doing in regard to this event being, taking place. And then second is that in regard to that, the second incident that I don't really agree with in full, and that is that this issue of Norman Butler being completely exonerated. And like I said, it's enough, there's enough information in regard to his particular role. And that also go for Khalil Islam. Khalil Islam tell you, he was a doctor, you can go to YouTube and find, he tell you that he was a strong arm man. That's what he did. That's what he's telling you. He said, the guy said, well, you was a strong arm man. He said, no, I like to use the word lieutenant. He said, did you, crack a guy up every once in a while? He said, that's what we did. So obviously he had a background in that. But he's making it seem, this is both of them, making it seem that, well, I didn't do this. And mind you, this is me talking again. I do not believe that Khalil Islam or Norman Butler was inside the Audubon ballroom when Malcolm was killed. I don't believe that. Now, there's some evidence that supposedly has been circulated just recently. I've seen the material before, years ago. The first time I seen it was on an interview with the St. Boza guy where they showed the footage, but they didn't piece it all together. Because in that episode, you see him talking and then it'll go fast and then he'll talk again. Because in the beginning, he says that, they say, well, did you catch anybody? He said, we caught 2 individuals, right? And then a few minutes later, he said, no, we only got 1. He said, where you catch the other guy? He said, we caught him outside, next to the police. That's what he said. Then all of a sudden, they say that the guy that they had caught, the other one who was supposed to look like some Arab Palestinian guy, they don't have him no more. They don't say what happened to him, where he went, none of that. And then the second thing is that, again, they leaving him off the cuff. According to the story, most of us that did research know that Norman Butler was already caught for, trying to knock off the correctional officer Benjamin Brown. Yeah. That's a fact. So the issue is that, like I said, I understand what the intentions of particular individuals was in regard to their time in the nation. My mother, I'm pretty sure she wasn't going around, thinking nothing like that. I'm talking about the rank and file in the nation. 99% of them always good people, straight up and down, very dedicated, and loved black people. But you had quite a few elements that were going on. Listen, bro, Jeremiah Shabazz in Philadelphia, bro, he was, listen, on a level you could never imagine. As a matter of fact, go Google Black Brothers Incorporated and see what you come up with. But that's the issue. Yeah, but the issue is that these particular elements were developed out of some of the best supporters of the nation. See, I lived in a city where the Minister James Shabazz really was the individual who was supposed to take over when Malcolm left. That was Minister James Shabazz's job. And according to the story, see, people get this idea that it was Farrakhan. It wasn't. Farrakhan was in Lost Number 12 with Clarence Gill, and what happened is that when Malcolm went down, James Shabazz went to New York, and Farrakhan came to Newark.
Right.
Yes, that's what happened. Yes, sir.
Who was the one delegating which minister would go to a city?
Who?
During Malcolm's time and after Malcolm's death?
Well, I would say this. I would say that again.
My second part is, was Elijah Muhammad still on the scene after Malcolm's death?
Was Elijah Muhammad still on the scene?
Okay,
Yeah.
was Elijah Muhammad still present after Malcolm's death? Who was the one?
You said present, like what you mean present?
He's saying alive.
Oh, alive.
Was he still present after Malcolm's death? And who was the actual person delegating which minister would go to a particular city?
You're asking me whether Elijah Muhammad was still alive when Malcolm was killed?
Yeah.
Yes.
So who, now my second part is, who in the Nation of Islam actually did the delegating of which minister would go to any particular city?
Well, again, at that particular time, it would vary.
From who to who?
Well, again, like I said, is that remember, at that time, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was having real serious health issues. Because remember, at that time, most of the time, Elijah would make decisions on a major level. But when it came down to certain issues, either Raymond Sharif would make those particular decisions, or Elijah Muhammad Jr. would make those decisions, or again, it would be a whole host of individuals. But a lot of them were inside the immediate family circle. Those individuals who were
That's it, brother.
those
All your
definitions.
questions for some other time. That's it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just a big hand. Thank you very much. 2 weeks from now is when? What date is 2 weeks from now? Anybody got a calendar?
Thank you.
March 13th.
March 13th.
No, excuse me, March 11th.
March 11th, we would have Dr. Lewis doing Africa on the Move. He will be here on March 13th. Dr. Lewis.
11.
March 11th.
The 25th is the irritated gene.
And then we're gonna have the irritated genie.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to
And then we're gonna bring in Dr. Randy Short if everything goes right. Ladies and gentlemen, give Brother Trust